So welcome everybody. My name is Andrew Skiok. I'm the president of the Australian Wildlife Sound Recording Group, and this is our inaugural online seminar, which we hope will be an ongoing series of seminars each month. And in a moment, I'll introduce a little bit about the group for those of you who are visitors for the first time. But I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. And an acknowledgement of country is a particularly Australian welcome. It acknowledges two things. Firstly, the First Nations peoples who have lived on this continent for many tens of thousands of years and have developed a deep wisdom about the ecosystems and the landscape here. And it's an acknowledgement of their custodianship of the country, which they've never ceded and they continue to practice to this day. So an acknowledgement of their elders and their wisdom keepers, past, present and emerging. It's also an acknowledgement that we all live on country. Whether you're in this country or elsewhere in the world, we all live in the biosphere on this planet. And whilst I'm joining you from Djadja country in central Victoria, for those of you in Australia, you'll probably know your own local people's land. But even if you're coming from elsewhere in the world, maybe First Nations land, it may be original colonial land, it's all country. And it's about respect and care for that country. So welcome. The Australian Wildlife Sound Recording Group has been in existence since around the mid-1980s, and it was originally formed by a group of people. It really brought together pretty much everybody in Australia that had a passion for waving microphones at wildlife. And some of them were this country's top field naturalists, professional researchers. Others were passionate amateurs, and so the group began from there. And I just recount a story that when I first became aware of the group and joined one of their biennial conferences in 1997, I think it was, and one of the sessions that we had was discussing incorporation, and at that point the group was kind of informal. They didn't really have a name even, so the discussion was around, well, what name are we going to register? And we thought, well, look, we're Wildlife Sound, we're Australian Wildlife Sound Recording. There's the British Wildlife Sound Recording Group and or Society. And so the discussion went around, well, what are we? Are we a society? Are we an association? Are we a club? That sounded a little bit lightweight. And after a while, one of our senior recordists, John Hutchinson, who some of you may remember, beautiful, gentle-spirited man, piped up and said, well, you know, we've always been a group of friends. And so I think that's what we should just be, the Australian Wildlife Sound Recording Group. Everyone agreed. And so when I say the AWSRG now, I think group of friends. So welcome, friends. And this evening, well, as the group has continued, particularly in the last decade, we've had a lot more people joining us from other disciplines apart from the natural sciences, and in particular the arts. So we're kind of transitioning into a broader interest in nature and listening and learning from nature. And Tim's not only a more recent member of the AWSRG, but he comes from that more eclectic and arts-based background. So Tim is a teacher at the Canberra Institute of Technology in sound production, and without any further introduction from me, I'm going to hand over to him. And what we'll do is, if you've got questions, anything that you don't understand or you'd like Tim to elaborate on in more detail, please put them in the chat and we'll collate those as we go through, and at the end we can turn mics on and have a discussion. So, Tim, over to you, and I'll leave that polling thing as well for you to kickstart in however you'd like.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the wonderful welcome uh, and the wonderful soundtrack as well, and all the work that goes on behind the scenes in terms of setting this up. So it's wonderful to see a bunch of people online today, some people that I know, some people that I don't. And it's wonderful to be welcomed into this group as well. It's been very nice since I joined only about a year or 18 months ago or something like that. I will add, I am coming, I am presenting here from Ngunnawal country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm actually coming from my place near Collector, which is just outside of Canberra, Australia. And I noticed that there's a few people from the Canberra or around here on today. So g'day to you and also to everyone around the world. I might just, as part of that, and some people have started this on the chat, which I really like. It'd be lovely just to see if everyone pops on the chat and just say where you are at the moment. Just good to get a bit of a glimpse into where people are joining us from, because we've got Axel's from Germany, we've got some people from other people from different parts of Australia. So yeah, just jump on the chat and pop that up. And I will introduce myself a little bit more as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a bit of a PowerPoint to share, and I'm hoping that it will work okay. So I'll get that up now. Okay. Excellent. And yeah, so introductions on the chat, and I will introduce myself in the moment a bit more fully in terms of what I do. In terms of a general overview of what I want to go through today, I want to just have a chat about the categories of sound and media, the sorts of sounds that we use in screen media in general. And when I say screen media, it's pretty broad, but I guess predominantly I'm thinking film and television type stuff. I'm going to show some examples of where I have used some of my field recordings of nature sounds in some film type work, and just have a little bit of a discussion of what I think makes for useful recordings, or some of the things to consider for that purpose. And then the idea is that there's plenty of time for questions or discussion at the end. And so, as Andrew has pointed out, feel free to chuck questions up on the chat as we go if there's something that you want to bring up. Equally, feel free to keep some things in mind to ask at the end if we want to. And this is the first of these seminars that we've done, so we'll have to figure out how that all works in terms of managing questions, but hopefully that all goes well and smoothly. So a little bit about me. I do a bunch of different sound and events work. Primarily, as Andrew pointed out, I teach at the Canberra Institute of Technology, teaching some sound production subjects, and I do that part-time. And on the rest of the part-time, amongst having a busy life and being a dad and doing things like that, I do lots of other sound work and events work, ranging from recording. So there's me recently recording a school band in their fantastic facility. Here's me out doing some field recording. This was actually a really cool gig. I managed to get a job recording some historical airplanes, but the reason that I was recording these was for Skywalker Sound, who are one of the biggest names in audio post-production in the world, and it was for some sounds that they were hoping to use for sound design purposes to go into one of their big films, Solo, which is one of the Star Wars story films, which was really cool. So I do a bunch of field recording for hobby and for work type purposes. And I do a lot of audio post-production work, and it's kind of a bit of a variety of stuff that I do, really. So a bit of a generalist in terms of audio work, but I have a fairly good technical background. Okay, so just thought I'd introduce myself and say why I joined the Australian Wildlife Sound Recording Group. And I was thinking about it, and I think where it came from was that I'd actually was reading about or had heard a podcast or something with Chris Watson, who is quite a well-known British sound recordist, and he's a member of the British equivalent group. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting sounding group. I wonder if there's something like that in Australia. And so I Googled the Australian Wildlife Society sound recording society or group, and managed to find the website. And then what do you know, I found that they were going to do a conference last year, which I did go to, and I met a number of you at the conference. But the conference, the keynote speaker was Douglas Quinn, who I'd also met at a previous workshop. And so I just thought I'd mention that in terms of my development in field recording, big props to the Wide Lab, who is an arts organisation based near Cootamundra in regional New South Wales. And they've run some fantastic field recording workshops over a number of years, amongst other different workshops that they do, including with Douglas Quinn, Jez Riley French, and Chris Watson. And so I've been lucky to have some experience recording and doing workshops with those people, which was really good. Of course, with Doug going to be at the keynote at the conference last year, I was keen to catch up and go and be a part of that as well. So that's sort of where I have come from. So coming from mainly a technical audio background, but with an interest in field recording from just, enjoying the sounds, and then always been interested in the environmental aspect as well. So the ecology and conservation, but probably increasingly so am I interested in that area, and been trying to undertake some work on my own property here. I'm on a small bush block to increase the biodiversity and some of those sorts of values. So I'm going to try this poll thing now. So I'm going to launch it, and hopefully that will pop up on your Zoom. And it's a multiple choice, and it's, why do you record wildlife or nature sounds? And so if you can pop on and put in your response to that, and I'm hoping that it's, I got Andrew to build this for me. I'm hoping that it's set up in such a way that it's easy to use, and that it's probably a way that you can multi-select. But we'll see what sort of answers we get from people, because I'm curious, and really, like, as a background, when Andrew hit me up about potentially doing a seminar, he said, oh, I'm not actually that sure what you do, what sort of thing you do. And so really why I picked this subject to talk about was for that reason. It's like, oh, okay, well, what do I do with the sounds, and what are my interests, and what do other people do? So looking at the responses at the moment, we've got ecological data research. In fact, I think I've got to end it so that you can see it. Again, this is part of me learning. So we don't have responses from everyone yet. I'll give it just a moment before we do, but it seems as though really strong numbers for listening pleasure or engagement with nature, as well as use sounds in media at around over 60%. And then we've got a couple of people that don't record wildlife and nature sounds, and that's all fine. Some others, and some ecological data research. I might just end it so that you can see the results. I think that's how it's going to work. So share results. Cool. So hopefully you can see those results now. We've got listening pleasure or engagement with nature and use sounds in nature being the majority. A few people ecological data or research, 5 people other, and a couple of people that don't record. I am curious with the other, because I was trying to think about what other reasons, and there's probably a million. But if you were one of the other respondents, I'd love to see you, or see what you say about what that other is in the chat. Would be really cool. And so, yeah, in terms of, for me, I'll just go back. Yeah, it's been a few things. So one, I do actually enjoy the process of field recording and getting out in nature and just listening. But I'm also usually thinking about finding useful sounds, useful in some way. And for me, that's useful in some kind of media, usually. So, and most often screen media, but it could be other sorts of media. So I have done a couple of installation things, for instance, where it's more like soundscape type pieces for people to listen to. A bunch of my field recordings have ended up in music. So either that I've been involved with recording or playing some kind of role in as well. And so there's a little bit of that goes on. Okay, now in terms of wildlife or nature sound in screen media, I thought, oh, well, we can't not discuss wildlife documentaries because that's sort of probably the big obvious one. And then I thought, oh, okay, should I try and get a sample of something to play that get copyright clearance on or not? And because I have been involved with some wildlife documentary stuff, and I did actually ask someone about that. But then I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just going to make a documentary. So I just knocked together a 30-second, we'll call it a scene from a documentary. Well, I made this little faux nature documentary. So I will play this for you in a moment. I will just bring up at this point the Zoom and the audio quality thing. So we've, Andrew and I have gone through and we've got some settings in Zoom that should be pretty good quality. So you should get stereo audio and those sorts of things. However, Zoom, the quality that you will get will be highly dependent on both my internet connection and your internet connection. And so things could be jumpy, things could get out of synchronization between video and audio. And it really does depend a lot on just the internet. And so if that happens for you, I apologize, but you'll just have to try and imagine that things are in time between audio and video as much as you can. Okay, so here's my 30-second scene from my faux nature documentary. Oops, didn't hit the right spot. Oh, don't tell me it's going to play, or did I get the wrong position?
But there is a reason why this echidna seems so uneasy, concerned even. You see, this echidna has a problem. It has an itchy bum.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed my my little documentary there. What I wanted to do is use that as a bit of a launching point to have a chat about the different sounds that we use in screen media. And so typically in sound design terms, when we're thinking about this or audio post-production, we're thinking about three big categories of sound. So a dialogue, and in this case, we had a narration or a voiceover part. And this is, you know, this is pretty typical of a wildlife type of documentary. Music, and in this case, I went for like a fairly dramatic piece of music because I find that that's a pretty common approach in some of these wildlife things. They're trying to create story and drama and all of that sort of thing. And then there's effects, and effects are, well, in wildlife documentaries, are generally nature type sounds or the sounds of nature doing things or wildlife. And so what I thought I'd do now is just play, so we can, I'll play you a version where I'll mute the dialogue and the music, and we're just focusing on the effects for a moment. Okay, cool. And so I'm going to try another poll on you, if I can do it. And let me just launch that now. And it's a simple question that says, how much of the sound in the video you just watched was recorded at the time of filming? And so you've got three choices. Is it 100% or close to it, around 50%, or none of it or very little? Okay. So have a bit of a go at that, and then we will go from there. Okay, so I'll just wait for a few more votes before I go to the next slide. Okay, and I might just call it that because that will do. I'll share the results with you. And we have a bit of a mix. So we've gone none of it or very little was 50%, which was the majority, well, the highest rating option. And then a bit of a mix. So some people thought 100% or close to it, and around 50% for the other. So that's cool. A bit of a mix. So what we'll do is, I just got to check which one I'm up to. Yep. So I'm up to another video. So this is the video that shows what the actual sound from the camera was as recorded. Now this is, I actually recorded this. Echidna came through the yard the other day. I could see that it was heading for the hole in the fence that we have strategically left for echidnas. And so I went round the other side. I grabbed my DSLR and I ran around the other side, and I just thought I'd hit record. And so I didn't set up for a shoot or anything like that. And so this is what we've got in terms of the camera audio. Okay, so look, it wasn't optimal. I just used the onboard microphone on DSLR, so it's, you know, not great, but that gives you an idea. So in actual fact, the one that we had watched before, the majority of people were right. There was none of that original sync sound, as we'd call it, that was used in that version that we listened to. And that's actually quite common in wildlife documentaries. It's not across the board. It's just really variable what could be gathered by crews as they're out gathering material for wildlife sounds. If you have a think about the mechanics of the filmmaking or the documentary material gathering, oftentimes they're shooting this stuff with extremely long lenses, so they're a long way away from the wildlife. And then you've got a camera operator there right next to potentially the microphone that's on the camera. So in this case, I can hear myself heavy breathing a little bit at the moment, so we're having a swallow. And, you know, so there's all sorts of challenges, and as well as, I think, as a group that is mainly made up of people that do field recording, I'm sure people will know how noisy the world can be, and how hard it is to get really clean recordings that are suitable to use in those situations. So breaking it down, we can break down the effects category of sounds even further into three kind of subcategories. Foley, sound effects and backgrounds. And for those people that do audio post-production works or sound design stuff, there is no surprises here about these things. But for people that haven't really done any of that or haven't been exposed to sound design or audio post-production, sometimes it can be a little bit surprising about the process and what happens here. And particularly for, I would say, documentaries where, but hang on, isn't it meant to just be the truth rather than all a lie or a story, or you know, and not necessarily, that's probably a bit harsh calling it a lie or a story, but you know, building it in such a way because we can't capture what could be real to a great degree. So if we have a look at our different categories, we've got Foley, and Foley in terms of the history of it came from early Hollywood days, and it's named after a person, Jack Foley, who did an excellent job and sort of set the way of doing things in terms of performing sounds in sync with picture. So in terms of filmmaking for dramatic films, etc., the classics are the footsteps. So somebody will watch the film on the screen and perform the footsteps in sync with the picture to get that all nice and clean. And there's a few different reasons why we might do that. But one of the reasons is just to make it all sound nice and good when you've got a really busy soundtrack, when you've got music and dialogue and everything else going on. A lot of those sort of other sounds tend to get lost without making them a bit bigger and better. So I've got a couple of pictures here to share with you. This is my friend Duncan, who runs a place called Infidel Studios in Queanbeyan, just near Canberra. And he and the crew there do quite a bit of Foley work. And one of the big things that they do Foley work for is actually some wildlife documentaries. And so here's Duncan working hard. He's got the documentary up on the screen, and he's got various props that he's working with. So he's got, you can see there, he's got a paintbrush in his hand. That's one of his favorites. Some towels or tea towels. We've got a box of tape down here, as in analog recording tape, and some different gauge or width tape here, which are great for grass or different types of foliage. We've got some real sticks and leaves, some logs, and all of that sort of thing. And it's a really fun but messy, potentially messy job. This is quite a small Foley studio. There are, if you ever have a look online or get the opportunity to go and check one out, the big film Foley studios tend to have really big spaces that are just full of stuff to use, and they've got pits with different surfaces, sand and gravel and blah blah blah, all of that sort of stuff. The other thing that we might want to do sometimes is water sounds, which are particularly challenging. So Foley normally, or in the true definition of it, as it has historically been for film, is performed in sync with the picture, where we're watching the vision and we're performing it in sync with the picture. Sometimes that's a little bit hard and tricky to do, so we might do it in different ways. And in this case, what we've got here is that's actually my friend Duncan in the water in the dam, and that's my friend Josh there booming. And we were actually, this was a recording session where I was recording. We've got, you can see, so in the boom would have been just a shotgun microphone, mono. In the blimp here, that is my Sennheiser MKH 8040 ORTF stereo setup. And then you can see a mic stand in the dam, and the mic stand is holding a hydrophone option, and I think we've got another hydrophone in there as well to get underwater versions of this. So gathering these sorts of materials, and a lot of these sorts of sounds that we were trying to gather were for things like sounds of dolphins jumping out of the water, stuff like that, which is impossible to do in a really small space in a really small body of water. And so the way that we did it was we went to a dam just down the road from my place, picked a quiet morning, and just gathered some material that way, which sounds so much more real and natural than trying to do some messing about in a little kiddie's pool or something like that. So that's just another way of doing it. And really, like, you're gathering material like that that's not in sync with the picture, we generally kind of classify that as sound effects. So we could be out field recording things and editing it in, or we're often sourcing sounds from libraries, and that's really dependent on the type of production, the budget, what the sound team has to work with. There's all these different factors in terms of where that stuff is coming from. So the other category that we have is, of course, ambiences or atmospheres or backgrounds, depending on who you are and where you come from and what you call it. In terms of our wildlife sound recording group, a lot of you have used or would use the term soundscapes, I believe. So things that Andrew, for instance, was playing earlier and that specializes in, that are more about capturing the sense of space, of the environment, of the location all around us. And so, yeah, really, and I guess probably that's one of the things that I lean towards is just capturing ambiences or atmospheres in different ways. What I thought I'd do is now just show you a few different examples of where I've used some of these sounds that I've recorded in some films, and just have a chat about the aspects of it, I guess. So the first one that I've got lined up here is from a film called The Furies that was made here near Canberra in the last couple of years. And I was fortunate enough to work on the crew both in production, which is when we do the shoot. So it was, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks of filming, and then also in post-production. So I was doing production sound, as in recording the dialogue primarily, but whatever action we have on in terms of the action happening on camera. And then I was also involved in post-production, primarily as a dialogue editor, which is dealing with the sync sound that I'd recorded on the set, basically, and trying to make that all work. But I also played some other roles in terms of I'd captured some other ambience materials, and I played a role in the re-recording mix, or the final mix of the film, with a few other people. So we'll just watch a little bit of this and have a listen to the sort of sounds that we've got going on. Okay, cool. And so we've got our big three food categories of sounds. So our dialogue, which in this case was primarily just breathing and breaths. And this movie was just full of lots of breaths. There is some music. So that is done by the composer with that sort of dark drone kind of vibe that's going on in there. Then is some ambience, and the ambience is, well, there's some ambience wrapped up in the production sound, the breaths and whatnot, but the ambience is actually primarily a field recording that I would have done, and that would have been at the time, and mostly if I'm doing surround recording, it would have been a quad setup that I was running with. I've got a picture of that which I can show you in a little bit, or for those people that did the went to the conference last year up at Smiths Lake, I had that 4-channel rig that I used, and that was what I would have done with this. So the recording, in terms of the ambience, the idea was to the bush, the Australian bush, and the nature played a big role. It was a big kind of character, I guess, in the film. And so we didn't want to hide from that, and we wanted to, you know, have some of that heat of the Australian bush in summer. So we've got the insects, and there's a fly or two that were going along. And normally, you know, for ambience recordings and stuff, I'm trying to avoid flies. You know, they end up buzzing straight past your microphone. So you've got that really close perspective when you're trying to get some nice, more distant perspective. So generally they're annoying. But in this case, I actually really liked the fly because it tied in with both the heat and also this idea of death, or there being dead bodies around and those sorts of things, which is, you know, due to the genre of film that we're working in. So that was a bit of a choice that we made in terms of that. And then I just thought I'd show that bit because I really liked Tony, the writer-director, how he was actually a real pleasure to work with. He was really thoughtful about sound, and he'd written that white cockatoo, or the soft-crested cockatoo part, into the script, which I thought was really good. And in terms of filming it and the sound, well, the filming was actually really lucky in that probably on the second day of shooting or something, they were setting up for a really big scene, and we heard some white cockatoos going off nearby, probably 30 meters away from where we were setting up or something like that. And so I sort of said to the B unit camera that was standing by, you know, we're waiting directions, you should go and get that while you can, because we might not get another opportunity to get a white cockatoo that is useful for that. And so they ran off 30 meters away and grabbed that tiny grab of the white cockatoo. And I sent my sound intern actually with a boom microphone, a shotgun microphone with a wireless transmitter. And so he went running off 30 meters away and was transmitting back to me, and we were setting up for the next shot basically. So I pressed record while I was setting up the other stuff and got that. In terms of whether that's the actual recording, I'd have my doubts because I'm not sure. There were a few things that we threw in as options for the white cockatoo sound. So one of them was the real recording with the sync, the image. And there was a couple of other options. One was a library sound, and one was a sound that I'd recorded in one of my field recording things where I had a white cockatoo fly overhead in a sort of forest setting. And so I'm not actually even sure which one that is. But it's always cool to see opportunities for sound design using natural sounds, and I really enjoyed that. And one of the things that I enjoyed about this film, working on it, was that the director Tony liked to give space for ambiences. So it wasn't just wall-to-wall music like some films are. And so that gives some sense of dynamic and quiet and calm, which is also really important when you want to try and do jump scare type stuff for genre films. So that's that one. In terms of the sounds, so really there was two categories of our wildlife or nature sounds that were used there. The ambiences, which was a surround recording, a quad recording, and then the more focused sound effects, which was generally mono, and in this case, it probably would have been the mono recording of the cockatoo, which was more just the white cockatoo, and we don't want other sounds, we don't want other birds and things like that. So they're the two main types of things that I guess I'm thinking about. You know, whether we want trying for a focused perspective or that wider ambience where we're trying to get generally the sound of the space or the environment. And so natural sounds, I guess, in terms of things that are useful, I think both ordinary and interesting sounds are good, which is hard to say. It just means that everything, I guess. Something that I've noted here that's I think is really useful is what I'd consider clean or pure recording. So like the white cockatoo, where you have a recording that is just a single species, for instance, then you can find that single species, and that can be really, really handy, and it's not full of other birds or other things going on. And also just thinking about the dynamic range and how we're going to use the sound. So the white cockatoo one, I want it to be loud and brash and in your face, but much more closer perspective than everything else in recording. But then for the background or ambient sound, generally a lower dynamic range without things jumping out to grab your attention as much is what I'm thinking about. So there is a sort of this consideration of perspective. Here's a different example from a documentary film. And I just thought I'd show this one because it's, again, this is not a wildlife documentary. It's a documentary called Etched in Bone, and it's actually about repatriation of some Aboriginal bones that were taken away over to the USA, and the story of them coming back home and those sorts of things. And this is a scene where we didn't want something natural, even though it's a documentary. It was allowed to be designed in terms of the sound. So I'll just play this and we'll have a chat.
The bones are here now, in this old cemetery built by Christians on the edge of Gunbalanya.
Yeah, and so what I thought was interesting about this one was just that idea of that crossing over between reality, using our nature sounds or wildlife sounds in a natural way, versus a treatment because it's unnatural. So this is a cemetery location, and the idea was that actually there's lots of spirits here, and spirit living on through the wildlife, through the birds, and we want to hear their voices, but it's sort of reality and of this world, and sort of beyond that as well. So it's kind of tying together these ideas. And in terms of the recording, so there's probably a couple of different layers of ambience recordings. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think from memory, there is production sound there, as in the sound of the actual shots or that kind of location. And I think I layered some of my own recordings from when I was in Northern Territory a number of years ago in there. Possibly the whistling kites. I can't 100% remember on that. But then right at the top of that little bit that I showed you is the recording of the Northern Kookaburra, and that was something that was recorded by Martin Thomas, who was the director, and he actually contributed a number of really useful recordings from his filmmaking. And he has a background in radio stuff, so has a real ear for sound. And we had a nice clean recording that you can then throw into a reverb sound and it works well without all these other sounds kind of mashing it up and mushing it up. And so that was the kind of thing there. So again, like the previous example, we have the both this close focused recording as well as the more wider ambience type thing. So then we get into this idea of sound design and what is it? The term is really broad and can mean anything to anyone, but in general, I guess everything that we're doing, like using these categories of sound to build our soundtrack, all of that is sound design. But often we might call sound design when we're trying to manipulate things in an unreal way or a hyperreal way, or trying to create new sounds as well. And so this is where there's lots of scope for interesting or different stuff. High sample rate recordings can be useful, and I'll get to that in a moment and just show you a little example. And the next one I'll just show you is sometimes even bad recordings can be useful. So this next little clip is just from another film called Blue World Order, and it's so the soundtrack, I've actually muted the music in this thing because there was just so much going on. It was really a loud bit of the film, and it was already a loud film. And so just to give it a bit of a bit of space so that you can hear the other aspects, so the dialogue and the effects. So I'll play this with, this is dialogue and effects basically without music, and then I'll play you an ambience from it that I used and talk about why it was kind of weird to use it. Okay, so that is dialogue and effects. Now I'll just play you just this ambience recording that I've put in here. And why I thought this one was interesting is because it's actually a recording that might get thrown out because it was rubbish. Except that I really liked it because it's kind of weird. And so just as a bit of a background, this is the recording is from down near Buchan Caves in Victoria, and it was sort of, I think it was on an afternoon when we'd arrived, and it had just been raining and maybe it had cleared up, and we thought we'd go for a walk, and I'd put the recorder out for a little bit and go for a wander. And I was recording with an Octava 4D, which is an ambisonics mic, so 4 mic capsules close together, and it's got to be decoded. And I was recording into a Tascam DR680, which is this was a number of years ago that this recording was made, and it's just a fairly, budget conscious recorder, I guess. It's not bad, but not a Slicko sound devices or something like that. And it has digital limiters in it, and they do a weird thing. And that's really what we're hearing here. So I'm just going to play it for you. If you're hearing all this weird distortion and low end, yeah, that's probably right. That's probably what I'm playing for you. Okay, and so what's going on there? Hopefully that, I don't know if that what translates over Zoom, but what we've got going on is that there's wind noise basically on the mics, but because of the way that the wind's buffeting and then it's hitting the limiters, it's kind of pumping in a weird way. The ambisonics mic has to be decoded, so it's bubbling and kind of doing a really weird thing. I just kind of liked it, and it actually has this low rumbly effect that's kind of running through it, as well as some of that chirpy natural sound. And there's a bit of phasiness kind of thing going on as well because of the way it was decoded. So yeah, all good. Now, sample rates. So normally we're recording at, and Jefferson sounds like traffic vibrating through an overhead pedestrian pass. Yeah, so that's right. Some of that low rumbly stuff can be taken from all sorts of applications. So sample rates for recording, and this is an interesting question that people often get. So what sample rate should we record at? And I would suggest that if you're recording for keeping things natural, then something like 48 kilohertz is fine for most people. And 48 kilohertz is our standard for video production. So if we are, for instance, if I'm recording for production sound, so dialogue, I'm out there recording on a shoot with a boom or something like that, then I'm recording at 48 kilohertz almost across the board. If I'm recording material that we think that we want to do weird processing on, such as extreme pitch shifting, manipulation, that sort of thing, then high sample rates can be desirable. Now, a lot of people that are coming at this from more the wildlife sound recording stuff and trying to record bats and things like that will know that recording at higher sample rates with devices that have the ability to capture higher frequencies mean that we can record stuff that's beyond the range of human hearing, beyond 20 kilohertz, higher than that, and then pitch it down so that it becomes in our audible range. That sort of thing can be useful for sound design, and particularly if we're doing huge amounts of pitch shifting to pitch stuff down. And so that's a consideration. So if I'm recording, and in fact, most of the time I actually record at 96 kilohertz when I'm doing field recording stuff. If I'm recording for sound design purposes, then generally I will go that way. I find that I'd never really record higher than that because I'd probably need microphones that can capture high enough to make that worthwhile. And I don't have a Sanken CO 100K that can record up to 100 kilohertz, for instance, or those sorts of things. So I haven't found it that useful, but it's not to say that I won't ever do that. So what I've just got here is an image showing in isotope RX. So on the top left, this is a 96 kilohertz recording. And most people will be aware of what our spectrograms, what it's showing, but just to decipher, and also because of the resolution that we've got going on, at 96 kilohertz, which I converted kind of all these files to, it's all at 96 kilohertz scale, we'll call it. So the top of our scale, in terms of our x-axis, goes up to 40 kilohertz-ish in terms of our range. So 20 kilohertz is about there. If you can see that, we'll call that 75% of the way up the graph. And so you can see here that I've actually got a lot of information above 20 kilohertz, above our range of human hearing. This is a recording that I think I played at the conference last year, which I believe to be an antechinus in my wall, which was living there for a while. And although there was some discussion about whether it was a bat when we did the conference, and I played it for you, but I'm pretty sure at least this recording is an antechinus. And what we've got going on is, so there's this material above basically our range of human hearing. This is just a noisy chirp. I'll play it for you in a moment. If I was recording at 48 kilohertz, so the top right now, then on that same scale, we would see that because of our Nyquist frequency, people either understand that or not, can't hear me. I'll try and talk like that. Maybe, hopefully that's all right, because I'm moving away from the mic perhaps. So at 48 kilohertz, we lose everything above that Nyquist frequency. So we'll call it above 20 to 24 kilohertz. We don't have any information above that. Okay, then if we then want to pitch shift this and manipulate it for sound design purposes, we can see that we get quite a difference because on our 96 kilohertz version on the bottom left pitch down, we're still retaining information up until about 15 kilohertz. Whereas our 48 kilohertz version pitch down, we're dropping down to around 7 kilohertz or so high frequencies. So that's a big difference in terms of how we can hear that. Now, I will attempt to change to isotope RX and play these sounds for you. So let's see how this is going to work out. Okay, so first of all, and the other thing is, well, really across Zoom's compression, I have no idea how well this is going to work, but we'll give it a go. Okay, so this is our original 96K sample. Okay, so that's our original sound, and it's a pretty noisy sound. It's not that tonal, so it's probably, there's probably better examples for pitch shifting, but it suited the purpose. It was something that I could think of that was a wildlife sound. You can't hear it. Okay, let me try and fix that. Thanks for the flag. And there's a question about pitching down, which I will talk about as well. So let me just try and get this audio happening for you. And I am hopeful that this will work. I'm also hopeful that it's not going to blast you. So I might just do a little thing here and pull this back a bit. Okay, let's see if this works. Audio, can I, Jesse or other people on the chat, could you hear that one? No, oh no, terrible. Well, that throws it. I don't know. I couldn't embed these sounds into PowerPoint. So you're going to have to imagine it, I guess. I'm sorry. Okay, so pitching down. Pitching down is where we are taking, let's say we have a tone. We're basically turning it down in pitch. Or we could be pitching things up as well. You might change the screen share settings, says Nicole. Yeah, I did do the share sound though thing. With the audio programs, it becomes a bit more complex because they've got their own way that they want to throw things out. I will just try this, and just in case it makes any difference. I'd say that's probably not changed anything for you. It's one I didn't test earlier, Andrew.
That's all right.
I'll take headphones off and play it through the speaker.
Yeah, yeah. It's not looking as though the cursor's actually
not
moving. So it's you may not have an output
okay.
on RX set.
Okay, I think it's not that important. The concept is more important. The sound's not that exciting. The main point of it being
Tim.
that if I that's what it sounds like. That's what I reckon an antechinus sounds like. So that's a probably controversial thing in its own right. Oh, Jesse says perfect. I'll take that. Yeah, we're taking, so the frequencies, let's say we've got frequencies that are occurring at 1 kilohertz, which is a very, something that's well within our range of hearing. And if we pitch it down by an octave, so an octave is taking it down to the equivalent note in musical terms, 12 notes down basically in Western music. Or 12 semitones down, I should say. So it's taking the 1 octave down is taking a 1 kilohertz tone, and we're now converting it or pitching it down to 500 hertz tone. And if we're converting it down 2 octaves, we're taking it down by half again, down to 250 hertz. I'm very happy to talk you through that in a different way. Is pitching down the same as slowing it down? Not exactly. However, slowing down is another reason why the high sample rates could be useful, because basically we've got more material that we can manipulate in terms of our processing. And so I guess the take home, even though the audio didn't work, is that high sample rates can actually be useful for these sorts of things. So that's really kind of the key. I won't talk for heaps longer because we want to have questions. I will just mention channel configuration. So when you're recording, what matters, I think for focused recordings where you're trying to capture, single species, etc., then going out with a shotgun microphone, a single mono mic, or a parabolic perhaps, or something like that, then that's perfectly fine. And then as you go into ambiances and backgrounds, we tend to want more either stereo or potentially going beyond stereo to surround formats. And I do the surround format thing because I like it. I enjoy the sound of it. I like being able to put it in films. Not that it's not something that I do all the time, but it is a thing. The other one that I would mention is the ambisonics option, which allows for lots of flexibility in terms of your output of your channel configurations, which is really useful. This is a picture of my quad recording rig that I use. So that's for Audio-Technica 4050s, which are actually a large diaphragm studio condenser mic. They're really not made for the outside world. They're more made for studio work. However, I happen to have a few of them and I use them for all sorts of purposes. And one day I was just giving them a run outside. I found these windshields for them and I gave it a comparison against my Sennheiser, some of my Sennheiser mics. And you know what? I really like the sound of these. They're really natural sounding, really open. And they have polar patterns that I can choose between cardioid, omnidirectional, or figure of eight. So a great deal of flexibility. The wind protection is not amazing, so I don't take them out if it's windy. But if it's nice and calm and quiet, I like the sound of it. So it's a little bit different. I don't know anyone else who's really using those for their recordings out in the field. Just one more thing, or there is a question about surround sound and ambisonics. And that's probably, there's a couple of these questions actually really good questions that might be good topics for a whole other talk, because you can really go down a rabbit hole and all of that. But with surround sound, I will just mention, so when I've done those films, for instance, that I show those examples from, the final mixes that we did for those were in 5.1 surround sound. And 5.1 surround sound involves a left, center, right speaker at the front of, we'll call it the cinema. And then you've got a left surround and a right surround, which are more to the back and sides of you. And then the 0.1 is a low frequency effects, or typically a subwoofer channel. And so that's a really common surround sound format for film. Ambisonics relies on, and I should have grabbed a mic to show you, but it's the classic one is the Soundfield microphones. Rode have their NT-SF1 these days, and there's a number of other options. It's 4 microphone capsules in a tetrahedral array, so call it a ball package pointing in all 360 degrees as much as possible. And and then you basically decode it. So you run it through a decoder, and from that, it gives you amazing flexibility in terms of choosing your output. So I just want a mono out of that 4 channels, or I want stereo, or I want 5.1, or I want even bigger arrays of surround configuration, 7.1 or beyond that even. You can build it out to something really big. So the cool thing about ambisonics is just that flexibility that you can get out of it. Okay, so I just wanted to mention metadata. So for people using sound libraries, they generally using some tools to find their sounds and be able to find them quickly. And so when they buy sound libraries, or when they're building their sound libraries, it's very important that things are labeled well. And part of that is the metadata that's included. Now, I don't use any fancy tools. So when I'm doing post work, I use Pro Tools, and I use Pro Tools a lot in general. Here's a picture of the Pro Tools workspace. And this is, I just did a search in my folder in here for my effects for Magpie. And so these are the files that have Magpie in the name, or in the comments, or in the metadata somewhere. Now, these are poorly tagged with metadata. However, they do have reasonably good label names. The file comment field that you can see there is some of our metadata that is embedded into the WAV files. And that's ultimately, it would be nice. I'd like to be in a place where I have more, all of that file comment has some notes about the files in it. But another way to do it is just to name your files really well if you don't have the tools to embed the right metadata or all those sorts of things. In terms of metadata, I'll just show you, this is Adobe Audition, another tool that some people use. And I'm just showing on the right-hand side this metadata tab and the BWF option. So there's several options for metadata in Adobe Audition. The BWF tab, the description is really I'd say, like, I think metadata, there's various implementations of it. And so you might use one program and have put in some metadata, but another program can't see that or read that, which is where it gets kind of a little bit potentially complex depending on how you're using metadata and what you need to use it for. So for sound designers, there are a couple of tools that people use, which I'll get to in a moment, which can embed all sorts of fields that it might be useful for a sound designer. The big one I would suggest is useful is that is pretty much, you'll find it works in pretty much any software, is this description field in the BWF metadata. So there's one of the ones, those Magpie ones. So this is it in Pro Tools, over the right hand side, that Magpie calling cheerily one. And here it is in Adobe Audition. And this is where you can see it's written in that description field in the BWF metadata. Metadata, I would say, is another one which you could have a whole seminar on. And I would suggest finding someone who's better at it than me to do that one, because there are people who are really good at that stuff. Sound librarians are a specialist software for finding sounds on your system, and this is mainly used by sound designers. So SoundMiner is a big one, probably the biggest one in the film world. Basshead is also really common and used by a lot of gaming people and people in the film industry. And then there's some other ones as well that work a little bit differently. Soundly and Pro Sound Effects have a search one, and there's a few different ones. So there are tools that can do it. They things like SoundMiner and Basshead can write metadata as well as read it, and they can make things a lot easier to find files, etc. They're pretty expensive though as well. So if you're going to use those tools, you want to be using them daily. Which if that's all you do is sound design or audio posts, then you probably got one of those tools. If you only do it occasionally, which is like me, I do a number of different audio jobs, then I just use the Pro Tools workspace, and it's fine for me at the moment. I will just mention a thing, and I'll try not to talk too long. I did mention that there is a thing that's been around for a few years, but there's recent development for metadata categories or naming categories for sound effects libraries, and it's called the Universal Category System. So while it's been around for a few years, that sort of, there's been some steps up in how that's being promoted and implemented very recently. So that might be something of interest if you are making libraries or in sound design stuff. And in terms of the categories and how they might be relevant to wildlife sound, I'll just show you a couple of some of the list because it's really categories that have been decided by a bunch of film sound designers. And so they're not categories that are necessarily categories that would have been chosen by ecologists, for instance. And so there might be types of environments or ambiences that don't quite hit the mark, or categories of animals or birds. For instance, if we have a look at birds, the only categories that we've got are miscellaneous, bird of prey, crow, fowl, songbird, sea, tropical, and wading. And so they're kind of from a sort of biological point of view, I guess, maybe different to what someone who specializes in birds would perhaps choose, but they're kind of for different reasons. And there are a bunch of sound libraries out there in the world, some big general ones and when I say general, it means that they just have a bunch of different sounds that cover all sorts of sounds, and then independent libraries. And there's a couple of websites that have really great, a really amazing selection of independent sound libraries produced by people all over the world. I noticed that I think Kyle mentioned his library on there before. I think I've got one of Kyle's libraries, and he's got a library on one of these, I believe. So that's a thing as well. Yeah, shout out. Okay, so, and really that's it. I just sort of go through all that. I know it's quite a lot of info. Hopefully it's a good amount of info without deep diving into specific aspects. And yeah, happy to go for some questions. So I will stop my share, I think is probably the best, so that we can just go back to face-to-face. And to answer the Les Gilbert question, will the recording of sessions be made available? I believe that's the plan, for the recordings to be made available. Andrew can, yep, thumbs up. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, any questions? throw them out there, and happy for people to we have an amazing group with lots of different experience. So there's actually probably some people on this meeting who are more confident in answering some aspects or questions than me. So I'm very open for participating in discussion.
Tim, there's a question from, I presume it's from Tony actually, Fiona's account about the difference between ambisonic A and ambisonic B.
Okay, so ambisonic A is basically the raw channel. So if we've got our tetrahedral array, it's the raw mic capsule signal, more or less, and then it gets converted into what's called the B format, which is a W, X, Y, Z, our dimensions. So that's the next stage of the encoding process. If anyone is an ambisonic specialist, feel free to butt in and tell me I'm wrong or have another explanation. But that's basically it. It's the B is the first stage of encoding, I guess.
So that's raw off the microphone, multi-channel.
The A is the raw, basically.
Yeah. And so
in a normal circumstance. So depending on how you're recording.
So which would be best for the wildlife? I guess what you're talking about is the output, the B being you can choose what you want to do in terms of the how you want to output it.
Yeah, effectively, that's right. So in my workflow, if I do a raw recording where it's the A, where it's just the mic capsules directly, then when I put it into Pro Tools, I use a plugin to decode it, and it does the two kind of steps. First, it's got to go to the W format, and then I can use the plugin to steer it into whatever output I want, be it stereo or 5.1 or whatever, which is kind of then you've actually decoded it. At that point, it's no longer ambisonics.
There's a question there from Vicky, Tim.
If I paste a 44.1 sound into a 48 kilohertz movie clip, is that a reasonable way to do it, or should I convert the audio to 48 kilohertz? Good question. It depends on what you are editing it into. So let's say, for instance, that I am working in Pro Tools or Adobe Premiere or something. Generally, when I'm importing that 44.1 kilohertz sound into a 48 kilohertz session, I would want to convert it into the same sample rate, into 48 kilohertz, so that the timing is the same, that it plays at the same speed. Otherwise, you run the danger of it playing at the incorrect speed. So normally there's a process that happens there, is the way that you want to do it. But normally the software can deal with that. There is a question from Hollis.
You want to unmute yourself, Hollis, and
Mike,
ask away.
Yes, thank you, Tim, for that fabulous presentation. Really, really informative. So I'm a violinist composer first, and then a nature recorder. So I certainly don't come with a built-in bias against human music, and neither am I a purist about sound design or reconstructing a soundscape. But here's what's on my mind. When we listen to Etched in Bone, that example really shows the power of the actual nature sounds, even if they're designed and edited and recombined, to do significant work without the easy grab of a Hollywood orchestra or a synthesizer. So my question to you is, with film music, do you ever push back on or feel like you'd really like to skip the human music component and what it seems to me like an unrelenting commentary of the human sort that talks over the animals?
Yes, quite a lot. And which is why, so certainly those first couple of ones that I showed you, the Furies and the Etched in Bone, had a lot of space in them. So that's built in the filmmaking. It's the pacing, it's allowing for that voice, that ambience to come through. And I love that. Personally, like, I really enjoy films that have that sort of thing. So there's a number of films that I enjoy that has very little human music, we'll call it. And allows for those quiet moments. And I imagine there's a lot of people in the group in the same boat. enjoy those quiet ambiences. So all the time, in terms of pushback, for the most part, I roll with whatever people want, the director, etc. And so then it's a case of rolling with it. So say that action film that I showed, that ended up with way more music than I would have hoped. Let's just say that in terms of the actual end result. Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago, I had Peter Gabriel did the soundtrack for Rabbit Proof Fence, and they got some sounds from us for that project. And when we saw the film, and I think the director came to the little town of Castlemaine for the premiere of the film, at least in Australia. And there's a scene where the girls are escaping from the convent where they've been locked up, and you can it's in the middle of the night, and you can quite clearly hear the sounds of North Queensland rifle birds calling in the background. And, I spoke to Philip Noyce about it, the director, and he just said, that's making movies, And, so the sound is there to tell the story, to enhance the narrative and add emotional layers. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, Tim, particularly, this sort of use of recognisably iconic sounds. For instance, the red-tailed hawk, the American red-tailed hawk basically means you are outdoors in the wilderness. The sound of a tawny owl means you are outdoors in the wilderness at night. I'm just wondering how it's a little bit similar to Hollis's pushback question, to what extent can you kind of, as a sound designer, add layers to that?
It's a really interesting question. Yeah, it's a really interesting question because film over the years has developed its own language and cliches and tropes, but there's certain things that as a viewer we come to expect, and people just know that when you're out in the desert and you're alone and you're dying of thirst, there's going to be a red-tailed kite or hawk, isn't it? That sound that you're going to hear, and so you can think of all these times when it's used. And yes, it is a bit of a cliche and a trope, but as a language, it has value as well. So there's this dichotomy to it, I reckon. There's value, even though there's not reality necessarily. So sometimes it's hard to know. You just got to roll with what you think is right, what feels right.
I remember as well, when I was growing up, the sound of kookaburras was, meant the jungle in Tarzan movies. And so what about using appropriate, location-specific and appropriate sounds?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the production. And so like for all those examples where I did, I kept that in mind, particularly documentary stuff. I think that's really important. So all of those recordings were regionally appropriate. Really though, then when we get into the more film of drama, there's so much unreality depending on what's going on that it's a little bit looser. And so I don't get too uptight about some of that stuff. But it is pretty funny though, hearing a kookaburra in South American jungles.
Yeah, there's some interesting comments coming in on that one.
Yeah,
I mean, I do find it.
So some good points.
Yeah, I agree with Jesse. When I hear a sound that's inappropriate, it just really sticks out. Like, yeah.
That's right, and that's true. But you also got to remember that sometimes though, a kookaburra, everyone knows what a kookaburra is, I think, in Australia at least. But in terms of watching a wildlife documentary and hearing a sound that you think that wouldn't be in that environment or whatever, I think people like yourselves that are wildlife sound recorders are very attuned to that. But the general populace, not so much. So, yeah, get away with a lot more.
Sue has just said here, and it's an interesting comment. I'd like you to comment on it. This addiction to hyperstimulation of the senses, and you know, a lot of the sounds like that, the clip that you started with. You know, animals are pretty quiet and often intentionally so. So, how do you deal with that?
It's a good question. I think that with, say, Foley, it's an interesting one because we want to generally we're trying to make an exciting and interesting mix, and it actually can be more engaging to make those sounds and make you feel like you're right there. And, you know, like the echidna was very quiet. It does make sound. And then you've got to balance that out about making the sound big enough to cut through often a dense mix where you've got music and narration and stuff. So, you know, like I was watching some documentaries recently that my friends worked on, and I was thinking, you know, I actually don't hear a lot of, I know they did a lot of Foley in these spots, but I don't hear much of it because by the time you've got music going pretty much wall to wall in a lot of these, there's not much space. So you kind of need these hyper real sounds to cut through, to hear, to kind of make it feel more real, if that makes sense. It sounds strange, but it's kind of what it's about. So I think that in terms of Sue's thing, the hyper stimulation of senses, yes, a little bit, but I think it is just about, and or in actual fact, that probably goes hand in hand with how busy the soundtrack is. Why do we feel like we need to have so much music in wildlife documentaries? And a lot of it is because the drama, the storytelling, etc. A lot of it is because it's hard to get really good sounds that fit that picture, and you know, so maybe the music is better at hiding that with using that same ambience loop for, you know, a big section of the film. Don't know.
Just a question on this, because I had this experience years ago. I was asked to provide sounds for sort of an interactive zoo, really, and they had a list of sounds, and one of them was kangaroos hopping through the bush, another one was a snake slithering through the grass, and the sounds of insects. And I got everything else in my library and I gave it all to them, but I just couldn't think of how to get, you know, decent recordings of these things for them. And I was stalling on it till the point where they said, come on, Andrew, where are these sounds? And I just gave up. I took my shoes off and stomped in front of the microphones to create the kangaroo sounds. I got a garden hose and dragged it through the grass for the snake, and then I put a whole lot of slaters in a bag with potpourri and a microphone for the insects. And,
Great.
you know, I spoke to a colleague in the States who said, yeah, you know, you spend all this time out in the field and then you end up stamping around in front of the microphones. So at what point does your skill in the field as a wildlife sound recordist just get sidelined by the requirement to just turn in a noise?
Oh, look, I think ultimately it's about whatever gets the job. So I think that you made the right decision in that case, because what they're asking for, or what was needed to tell that story in that application, was near impossible to get a good recording of. You know what I mean? Like maybe you could get a rue, but the timing and to get it clean enough without all the rest of it going on, you know, it's a really big ask. So I think it's fine. I think you're actually still, and the thing is too, with you're coming at it, approaching at it with an ear that at least has an ear for wildlife sound, which is nice. So I think you probably would have done it tastefully.
Yeah, I guess that is the thing, isn't it? To kind of know your material so that even if you are kind of doing it by Foley, you've got an idea of what it should actually sound like.
Yep, agreed.
Has anybody got other questions? But feel free to unmute yourselves and chip in. Looking as though everyone's reasonably quiet, Tim. Are there any more thoughts that you've got,
I think
Tim,
we're
that
pretty
you
good.
want to finish
I
off
will
with?
mention. So Perdita said, could people suggest classics of nature sound used in film, things worth watching? So that's an interesting one. One that I remember enjoying the quiet ambiences in is Sweet Country, an Australian film. I forget the filmmaker's name. He made Samson and Delilah, Indigenous one. It's kind of almost got a Western vibe in terms of the film, but I really enjoyed the quietness of some of the spaces in that. So that's one that comes to mind as an Australian film that has some nice quiet ambiences anyway. But yeah, look, otherwise, great. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for talking. Vicky says, did anyone get the boom of the kangaroos coming down the gully at the Barradine Glossy Blacks? And some other people probably get that reference.
Tim, I accidentally had the everyone on mute. If that was the case and you do want to ask a question, I've changed that setting, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
All good. We've got the chat anyway as well. So thanks everyone so much. Thanks, Andrew, for lining up, and not just Andrew, but the rest of the committee there that are doing things. And it's just nice having a chat and seeing people. And yeah, let's do it again with someone else presenting sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
well, look,
you.
I'll just
Cheers.
thank you very much, Tim. And
Must
I'll
make
just
sure we know what time we're on.
Yeah, well, we're on daylight saving down here in Canberra, New South Wales, Victoria. So
yeah, we're on summertime saving or whatever, and we missed it.
Well, pick it up on the video. So look, thank you very much, Tim, and thanks everyone for joining us. Next month, I've invited our friend Jennifer Ackerman, the science writer from America. She came out here. When was it now? It'd be 3 years ago, and attended the Barradine conference. And a lot of the research she did on that trip has ended up in her new book called The Birdway. So she's going to be on to talk to us about that. And that will be, let me think, I think it's the 17th of November. I think we've scheduled that one in. Anyway, I will deluge you with emails. Yeah, the 17th of November. This will be 7:30 in daylight saving time. So 6:30 for you, Tony. And but I'll send out some information about that. So if there's no other last-minute questions, actually one last thing I wanted to say, and that is for those of you that haven't seen it, one of the most extraordinary wildlife films, documentaries that's recently come out, My Octopus Teacher. And I think it's on Netflix, if not elsewhere. It's an extraordinary film in terms of narrative, and really gets that balance between human connection with the natural world and it's a difficult one to get that balance right, but they do in this film. And it's interesting in terms of the sound design because it's all underwater. They actually have a very subliminal music track running through most of the film, but it's beautifully shot. It's just absolutely, it's stunning. So yeah, have a look at that if you haven't seen it already, and if you have, you probably want to see it twice anyway. So Tim, once again, thank you very much. And what I'm going to do with these sessions is that I'll set up the same as we did this time. I'll run it through Humanitics, and they allow scheduling of emails. So the links will go out, well, you'll get it as soon as you register, but they'll also go out 48 hours and 2 hours before the session time begins. So if you're searching around in your emails for the meeting link, it will be there. Just have a look in your spam folder. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
See you, Andrew.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, who's that?
That's Tim Green.
Andrew,
Yeah.
this is Jessie speaking. I'm just wondering, did my resource list come through the listserv okay?
Sorry, what come through?
I sent a resource list that I compiled for John.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure because I didn't get any responses other than John.
Yeah. Are you talking about the groups.io list?
No.
I think that's where I picked it up because you posted to the.
No, Vicky just shared it in the chat. Thank you, Vicky.
The group.
It was
yeah,
in the
link.
groups. It was in the groups.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether you tried file sharing or something. I think I might have turned that off. But yeah, the link is there. So what Jesse's done is create a shareable document that we can all look at and edit. And it's a list of resources about different software and so on. So anybody that's got any information, links, pages, it's basically a reference document. So you're invited to leap onto that link and contribute to it, learn from it. Am I describing it right, Jesse? Anyway, yeah, so if you want to grab that link, I think everyone can download and save the chat. So you'll have that link, but it's up on groups.io as well. So I might put it in the resources part of groups.io.
Okay.
And opened up here.
Just one question, Andrew. Can you hear me? It's Jeff.
Yeah, I can, Jeff.
Mate, that sound of that kangaroo, you sure it wasn't the sound of a pretty faced wallaby?
Could have been. Didn't have any shoes on. I couldn't.
Yeah.
It is that link.
It wasn't an agile wallaby anyway.
Very good.
Very good.
I was wondering about that. So the poll doesn't work for the hosts. Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. Should we finish off and I'll shut down this little beast and go and have dinner?
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Oh, there's Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Michael.
Hey, hello.
Good.
Been lurking away in the background.
Yeah.
Oh dear, roll on the time we can actually meet in
Nice to see everybody.
Yeah.
Hey, Nicole.
Feel slightly connected.
Yeah, sure. All righty, well, we'll catch you all again next month.
All righty.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you all. Good
You can
night.
hop away now.
All righty, bye for now.